Welcome everyone to our next video. We've titled it Bracing for Impact, Making Tough Decisions. And this is our third video in our financial wellness program video series. You can find the links to the other two below. The financial wellness program is made possible by the support of Richard Rooney and Laura Dinner. And I'll just introduce myself. My name is Christine Rossi-Wright, and I am the Senior Program Worker at the AFC. And I am sharing this lovely video and screen time with Chris Enns, so I'll let him introduce himself to you.
Thank you so much. I'm Chris Enns. I'm a financial planner at Rags to Reasonable, a firm that's based in mainly helping the creative sector with finances and figuring out their place in this whole money conversation. And so, well, like we've talked about in past videos, it's been a busy year as money and creativity have kind of come to a complete head and kind of crashing into each other. So what we focused on in our first videos was really talking about finding your footing, saying, where am I right now? What do I need? What do I have? And just trying to find yourself of like where you are here, putting that sign on your financial map. And so if that's kind of where you are right now, or those are where your questions are, we really encourage you to take a look at those first videos before taking a look at this. Or if you don't mind being out of order, just dive in. You can take a look at that one after. But what we really wanted to focus on in this video was the idea of making really tough decisions. Because one thing that I think Christine and I have talked about a lot is how much that's something that we hear over and over again, is these really hard choices. And it's really easy for people making videos about finances to come up here and give you really tidy answers to some of these hard questions. And that's not what we want to do for you today. I wish that we could. I so wish we could tie it up in a neat little bow and just say, if this, then this, but that's not what life is. When we're facing these really hard choices, there are no clean answers. There really are no easy right choices, wrong choices. It's just hard. And that's what you're feeling right now. And I want you to know that it's hard because these are hard things, not because you're falling short, not because there's information you don't have, not because you're financially stupid, if that's something that is kind of rolling around your brain. That's not what's happening. These are really hard things. But what we want to try to give you are some tools for thinking through these things. What are some questions for you to ask? What are some issues to look at? Who are some people that you can start to talk to so you can gather information around this and try to feel like you're not having this choice foisted on you, but perhaps have some agency within this decision to actually make that choice. So that's our goal for you today. But I know that that's not always easy. One of the things we talked about a lot in kind of preparing for this video was how many choices you've had to make. And this idea of, Christine, you were talking about decision fatigue being something that you just hear all the time, or at least that's how you would interpret what you're hearing all the time.
Oh yeah, definitely. And decision fatigue, it is a thing because it takes a lot of energy to make decisions. You know, you're constantly assessing risk over benefit, and some decisions are harder than others. And prior to the pandemic, you were making, I think I heard once, like 20 or 30,000 decisions in a day. So you're just making that on a regular day. And then now when we're, in the middle of a pandemic, you're doing those regular decisions, those risk over benefit assessments, and you're doing it at a higher rate. You're thinking about things like, should I go to the store for that one thing? Is that a cough, or is this allergies? Do I have to wash my hands again? These are just some small little things. And then you're going to add that, the financial decisions on top of that. How do I pay down my credit card, my loans, my arrears? So making decisions about your finances is really hard right now. And thinking about that, when you're adding that financial stress, this could really affect your mental well-being as well. Do you face a decision? I guess these are the questions. Do you face the decision now? or do you choose to ignore it? And both bring challenges. They both bring stress. They both bring anxiety, depending on what you choose. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit throughout this video.
So the three quick questions that we're kind of big questions we're going to look at today are the following. We're going to look at drowning in debt. One thing we've heard a lot from people is just the feeling that debts have been climbing, whether it's bills stacking up that you haven't been able to pay, credit card bills growing because you've needed to use that to kind of close the gap, and just saying, how do you think about this? How do you look at the next step? So drowning in debt. We're going to look at, do I need to move? That's a big decision that a lot of people are facing. Do I need to change my housing situation? Can I afford to stay where I am? And the third one we're going to take a look at is around the question of income. How do I earn more? What do I do? How do we balance this idea of identity and earning, and how much is enough? And at what point do you try to do something completely different? And is that option even available to you? So as you can see, some big questions. We're going to kind of dive into them and make a big mess and probably come up with no clear answers, but hopefully some clear tools for you to take that next step.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to remind you, I want you to, throughout this, I know this is going to be, some tough topics, tough things that you're going to be thinking about. I just want you to periodically check in with yourself, connect to your breath, just take some deep breaths. If you need to walk away, come back to the video. I just wanted to add that little bit of just a reminder. And if you're looking for any tools, grounding or breathing techniques, I reference a lot of that in the other two videos, so you're welcome to check those out. We'll put the link below. But I urge you to take those moments for yourself. It's important for your mental health, and it's important for your well-being, and it's important when you're making these really tough decisions.
So the first big question we wanted to look at was this idea of debt. And I know that so many of us in the creative community are really wrestling with debt in all of its forms. We can talk about emotional debt, we can talk about energy debt, but we're going to talk about financial debt specifically, and just this idea that many of us have been living with reduced income for the last 6 months, 7 months, and that has a myriad of effects. A lot of us have deferred bill payments for a while, and that was great at one point, but now they're starting to see those balances come up, or landlords are starting to come back to us and say, you need to pay the difference from what you paid, or we need to make a new rent agreement for the next 6 months to include increased payments, but the income hasn't gone up. It's something that I've heard a lot. And Christine, you were saying that that's something you've heard a lot from your clients as well, around this idea of debt and drowning.
Oh my gosh, definitely, 100%. And they're feeling very financially, I would say, insecure. And they feel like they're, like you said, drowning in debt. They have these arrears that they're really unsure of how they're going to, address them and pay for them. There's no job. They think of things like, when will my government benefits come in? Like, even right now, we're unsure when the Canada Recovery Benefit will be starting. They think of things like, when will I have enough to pay for my expenses? And again, coming back around to these, making these tough decisions about finances is really hard, and it can really negatively impact your mental health. And it's something that we don't really think about, but when you think about this financial insecurity, it really ties into the notion of stress and anxiety, which we talked about in our first and second video, and a sense of low self-worth even that could be connected to this, feeling of hopelessness, even this loss of identity. And I hear a lot this feeling of shame, just really hearing this feeling of shame. And like you said earlier, Chris, the kicker in all of this is that you're faced with these tough decisions with the debt and stuff and how to address it. And they're not by choice. They're because you have to.
Yeah, Yeah, it's not a choice that you want to make. It's a choice that you're being forced on. And it's a choice that's getting harder and harder every day because you're literally seeing balances rise and rise and rise and say, is my work coming back? Am I going to pay this off? Even under normal situations, could I pay this off? Am I in a hole that I'm never going to be able to get out of? And that's an incredibly difficult position to be in. So financially, what can help? Just starting to unpack this a little bit, because one thing that we discussed, just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, Christine, in our first videos was just the shame. There's so much shame around debt. And we talk about debt in such a linear way. We talk about debt in such a, debt is bad. So if you have it, you are a bad person kind of mantra over and over again. That's not how it is. It's much more complicated than that. It's a tool that many of us have had to use. But when we look at saying, what's the end of that tunnel? There's a few things that we can look at. So the first really helpful thing is what we talked about in our first videos, which is just getting a sense of where you're at. It's really tempting, and I understand it, to want to avoid looking at debt and balances and what you owe. It is the monster under the bed that you know is there, but you think, I don't want to look at those balances. I don't want to look at how much is there. I don't want to add up how much I owe in deferred utility bills and rent, and I don't want to see that big number. But it does help to just sketch that out and really see it, look that monster in the face. So if you want some help in trying to figure out how to do that and what numbers to look at, I'll refer you back to our first videos again. The links are in the bio below. So just get a sense of, what do I have? What kind of problem am I trying to solve? And then from that point, it says, how do I solve it? How do I move out of this? What is the trajectory? And under normal circumstances, we could look and say, okay, what are you making? How is all of these things? But that's really hard these days because income is such a precarious thing, even more so than normal. We don't know when a thing's going to come back, whether there's going to be a new lockdown. And so the things I wanted to talk about were things that are not often talked about. And that's the idea of the tools in finance of a consumer proposal and a bankruptcy. So bankruptcy is a word that more of us have heard, even though I don't think that the process is nearly as understood. But consumer proposal is actually not one that we have always talked about as much. And so it's worth mentioning. So these are both tools to help people that are drowning in debt. And they're both done through the process of talking to somebody called a debt trustee who can help kind of facilitate this. But I wanted to give you just some basics idea to give you a bit of a grounding and then talk about where you can go for next steps. So a consumer proposal basically is the idea of going to working with your creditors in order to reduce the debt load that you owe and make a payment plan that you can actually afford. So not the entire amount, some kind of reduced amount, a payment plan that's set in stone and has a lifetime. So you're saying, this is over 5 years, this is what I'm paying, and at the end of that 5 years, I'm done. So you might be eligible for this if you have debts of less than $250,000, not including a mortgage. The mortgage is not included in that. So that's the kind of general eligibility. And one of the benefits of this is that you don't go through that whole bankruptcy process. You don't necessarily have to surrender assets in the same way as sometimes you do under a bankruptcy. And you don't have to report your income and expenses in the same way. And it also doesn't affect your credit report quite as much as a bankruptcy. So the general idea around a consumer proposal is that once you pay off the amount, so you come to an agreement and you pay off that amount, after 3 years, so 3 years after you finish paying that off, it gets taken off your credit report. And so there's no longer a record of that. And so you can kind of start resuming a completely normal financial life. It doesn't mean that your life is on hold for those years that you're paying off either. You still can have access to some of these things. That's not a deal breaker. And those are some questions you can ask a debt trustee specifically when they're looking at your situation, your credit score, your all of those things. But that's the idea of a consumer proposal. Payment plan over a set period of time for less than you owe right now. A bankruptcy is kind of the next step up in intensity. A bankruptcy means really wiping the slate clear of most debts, not all debts. So debts that are secured by something, which means like a mortgage is secured by your house. So those things are linked. So that wouldn't be included. Your car loan is generally secured by your car. So that's not necessarily included. But things that can be included in a bankruptcy are credit card balances, bank loans that are not connected to a physical asset, lines of credit, payday loans, outstanding bills, tax debt, even student loans. If you've been out of school for 7 years, student loans can also apply. So these are the kind of debts that you can look at. If you owe more than $1,000 and you can't pay your debts, and your debts are more than your assets. So this is another one of those, back to that first couple of videos of taking stock of what your assets are. This might be a tool for you. The process takes around as little as 9 months. This will vary for people, so talking to somebody is helpful. After which your debts are gone. And you can kind of go through the process of rebuilding your credit. Usually it takes 6 years for that to be discharged off of your credit report. It's a tool that many people have used. I think that bankruptcy is often linked to a strong feeling of failure. These are words that often come up around using bankruptcy as a tool, or consumer proposals. But that's not what these things are. They are literally here for situations like this, for people that don't have a way forward. And the only thing that we can do is just say, okay, can we reset so that I can have a fighting chance at this? That's what they're built for. And it doesn't mean the end of your story. It doesn't mean the end of your financial story. It doesn't mean that you'll never own property or be lent to again. Yes, it does have an effect, definitely. But it often, Christine and I were talking specifically about consumer proposals a little bit. And just that whenever we've kind of had clients go through this, what they talk about is the lightness that they feel afterwards, and just not even realizing how much weight the debt had been adding to their everyday life. And that being able to kind of step through and have a plan through a consumer proposal, or just being able to reset things through a bankruptcy, often people express that's worth the cost. And so it's definitely worth considering. Now, when you're looking at next steps, going to kind of talk to somebody is a really good first step. And just remember that you're not committing to anything if you go to talk to somebody. This isn't like you call the person, then automatically you're enrolled in a bankruptcy, or the bank knows that you even asked questions about a bankruptcy. So talking to somebody, at the AFC, we recommend working with Credit Canada. We'll put the contact information below, to just start that conversation. Because what they can do too is really look at what your situation is, and be able to answer some of those specific questions about what might you need to surrender and what might be safe, because it's much more nuanced than you think it is. And getting to answer some of those questions can be really, really helpful. And one of the things that we want to talk about as we look at these big questions in general is just what to look for in somebody when you're asking for help. And the basics really are, and I just want you to trust yourself on this one, is that they listen to your questions respectfully, and they answer them in a way that you can understand. This seems like a low bar, but in finance, that doesn't happen a lot. You feel like people are talking over you or attacking you for the decisions or the situation that you're in. Red flag. You want people to be able to say, these are kind of your questions. These are your answers. I can speak to you. I understand how that was, and makes you feel comfortable, because you're going to be working through them through this process. If they are somebody that gets paid as a result of this process, and so that's something you can talk to a trustee about as well, make sure they can explain to you how they get paid. It's okay that people get paid. That's fine. But they should be able to explain that in a way that's not hidden and is clear, and so that you understand that as well. So those are some of the things to think about. Trust your gut, and just make sure that you're being treated with respect with whoever you're talking to. Christine, does bankruptcy come up as a topic of conversation when you're talking to people through the AFC? Is that a word that ever kind of gets mentioned, or what are some of the things that come up in that conversation as you're talking to people around debt?
Well, for some of my clients, some of them do carry a larger debt load, and we do have, we do talk about that. It comes up either from they're asking me questions around it, or I've asked the question, just trying to see where they were at, if they've thought of it, not to push anything on them, but just kind of open up the conversation. And typically with those clients that I've had that conversation with, it's not really taken very positively. There's a lot of shame around it. A lot of, they have no interest in even having that discussion. And I really think it's because of the discourse around this notion of bankruptcy, this notion of consumer proposal, and that they don't see the benefits to it. But on the other hand, I have to say that I have spoken with some of my clients that have gone through the process of a consumer proposal or gone through the process of a bankruptcy, and they're on the other end, and they're very thankful for going through this process. So I kind of get one side of the coin and the other.
It's kind of that continued thing. There's no easy answers here, because the truth is that some of the resistance, some of the questions that come up are real things. I know one of the things you mentioned to me is like a resistance with this, like, it's going to be really hard for me to find a place. You know, if landlords are running credit checks and this kind of comes up, and like, is that going to affect my ability to house myself? And that's a really good question, because as much as I can say, not all landlords do this, or it might not be, as depending on your credit score, it might not be a deal breaker for you. It's a real thing to be afraid of. And I think that when we talk about money, there are these beliefs that kick in, right? These kind of beliefs at the core of how we think things work. And I think especially around debt and around some of these big tools, those things are really powerful. And so what I think I would encourage people to do is name those things. Like, when those resistances come up, just really listen to them and write them down. Like, make yourself a list of, I could never go through a consumer proposal because, 1, I don't know if I could find an apartment again. 2, I'm never going to be able to borrow money again. 3, that would mean I failed. 4, like, whatever these things are that you're telling yourself, not because writing them down changes how hard they are, because it doesn't, but it gives you some really good questions to ask a debt trustee. Does this mean that I can never get a mortgage again? Maybe, doesn't mean never, but they can give you a sense of like, what's the timeline there? It may mean delaying goals. It may mean changing the trajectory of what you want, but maybe that's worth it for the cost that's happening right now. Maybe it's not. Really, it's just about gathering this information, but really kind of noticing those things, I think, is a good, helpful tool in making these difficult decisions. What do you think?
I completely agree. And I always believe, writing things down, seeing them on paper, even if that means, I know this may sound odd, but it does work. Even drawing something that means those thoughts that are coming up, using different colored pencils, or adding, some color around that can even help get things on paper. I think it's really important to get these ideas out of your thought and put them on paper, because then you can actually objectively look at them. And like you said, you have them in front of you. You can take agency over this and ask the questions, because possibly the answer that you are expecting is not what you're going to get. And it could be, more than likely, it will be a positive one than a negative one.
Exactly. Because when we're looking at hard choices, again, these are hard because they are deeply rooted in way more than just numbers. The numbers may seem impossible, but it's identity, it's success or failure, it's all of these things. And so what you can do right now, whether you're ready to make that choice or not, is just give yourself more information on how you actually feel about it, where you actually are right now, what the implications and tools and kind of pathways in front of you are, so that when you reach the point where you can make a decision or are forced to make a decision. You can feel like you have a bit more agency in that. You can feel like you know who you can pick up the phone and call in order to take that next step. If you have the mental resources to do that right now, that's the place to start wading through this quagmire of where is the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to your debt. Gather that information, look at the tools, and if you can, make the call to just create that relationship and figure out what those next steps might look like, and figure out what those next steps might look like for you.